Hi everyone, I'm Wendy Muse, the creator of the Left Pocket Project, an online platform that seeks to bring you the histories of leftists of color one swipe at a time. And this is the Left Pocket Project podcast. Before I introduce my guests for the 8th episode of the Left Pocket Project podcast, I wanted to give a big thank you to all of my subscribers on Patreon, new and old. From dollar donors to $5 donation comrades, all of your support goes a long way. As I've noted on Twitter, your generosity helps fund recording and editing software, online storage fees, and a whole lot of coffee. Your contributions also help fund the annual fees for the website leftpoc.com, which I will be launching very soon. So thank you very much again. On that note, whether you can or can't contribute financially, you can always help the Left Pocket Project in multiple ways. You can retweet, repost, and share. You can check out the leftists of color whose histories I cover through the project and retell them to a family member, significant other, or a friend. You can both learn and educate. Whatever method you decide to use to spread the word, I will appreciate. Now on with the show. In today's episode of the Left Pocket Project podcast, I'm joined by Victor Monterrosa, an activist and attorney from Newark, New Jersey, who's currently running for city council along with several other progressive Newarkers who make up a platform they've called AMP, or A Movement for the People. Victor received a BA from Vassar College in 2007 and his JD from Rutgers School of Law in 2014. As an attorney, Victor has represented indigent clients on matters of housing, bankruptcy, and consumer law, and at present he works as a staff attorney at Covenant House of New Jersey, where he represents homeless young people in criminal and civil cases. Victor also serves on the Newark Civilian Complaint Review Board to investigate police misconduct, assists the Greater Newark HUD Tenant Coalition with affordable housing matters, and serves as treasurer of the Urban Cooperative Enterprise Legal Center. Victor and I talk about the history of challenges and progressive activism in Newark, his run for city council, and what inspires him to remain committed to his community. Victor, thanks so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I noticed that you are running for office in Newark. I feel like I see so much in the news about Newark, but I'd be curious to know like your own personal perspective and how you got there.
Yeah, well, it's been a little difficult because I'm not completely in love with electoral politics. I think that a lot of the problems, these big critiques that we're hearing more in the last few years with, or that's become much more clearer in terms of corporate control over elections, or how candidates are often in the pockets of corporations or moneyed interests. I usually stayed away, but in the last 3 or 4 years, seeing things like what happened with Bernie Sanders, or just the fact that people in general seem to be very disaffected with the two ruling parties, that's something I felt since I was a teenager, and now that it's really come into the mainstream, my mentor said, you know what, this is a chance for you to really work with people, really reach out with people, be able to expose some of the contradictions that we have in our electoral process, and of course, hopefully be able to make great change and represent all the folks that I've been working with for so long, not as an organizer or as an attorney, but as an elected official.
And what office specifically are you running for, and why did you choose that office?
So I'm running for councilman at large in Newark. Newark is the largest city in New Jersey, not too far away from New York City. And I decided to run for councilman at large because I have advocated before the council for about 10 years now. And I have come to the council with everything from asking them to prevent demolition of public housing to in making improvements to our polluted air, or to stop certain deals happening, like allowing medical waste to be processed in our neighborhood. I've advocated on education issues or on hospital closings. And every time this comes to the council, every time I brought this to the council, I always bring numbers. I was a debater in high school. I've been taught to be able to give a really good debate. And when I would come to the council with these numbers and with this backup, with this evidence, I wouldn't hear anything from them. And so I would step up my lobbying, especially for tenants' rights, which is the main organizing job that I had advocating for the council, and I would never see results. So recently, in the last 4 years, a group of tenants was able to get a rent control ordinance passed, a strong rent control ordinance. And shortly after they passed it, the administration, which is Russakoff's administration, has been lobbied heavily by landlords and developers who convinced the mayor and the people who sit on the city council to weaken the ordinance. So in the last 4 years, we fought that back. But in last March, they weakened it, and we were tired of it, and we were able to pass a petition where we were going to get the issue on the ballot, and we actually forced them all to vote on it instead, and they passed it. And at that time, it just made sense. We need better representation on the council.
So speaking of representation, someone who's very prominent from Newark, who's often in the news, is Cory Booker, for better or for worse, often for worse. And I often see him sort of grandstanding or doing a lot with regard to platitudes against Trump and other conservative figures. But on the progressive side, on the left, we have a lot of criticism of Cory Booker. And I really wanted to hear from you as someone from Newark. What is your relationship like as a resident of Newark, as someone who's an activist in Newark, with a lot of public officials? How is the relationship between, or I guess the disconnect between the image that they project to the larger public and the real on-the-ground relationship they have with people like you and your community?
Well, any time that people are working on the ground, which is constantly, it's always going on, that's not in the news. That we never see these small town meetings where 3 or 4 people come out, or maybe 20 on a good night, who are concerned with improving their neighborhoods or avoiding decisions that'll make their neighborhoods worse. You never see that on TV. What you do see is these really big PR opportunities, which Senator Booker has been really good at taking advantage of, whether it was when he ran into the burning house or when he was living in the tent outside of public housing. He knows how to bring the media around him. And, some people just aren't really good at that. In terms of his relationship with folks, of course, as doing 2.5 terms as mayor, he made a lot of relationships, and he needed to build very strong relationships to get into council to begin with, and then eventually win the mayor seat. But Mr. Booker, I think, it was often very aligned with more neoliberal or moneyed interests. And one interesting situation that happened in Newark that a lot of folks don't know about, I don't think it really made the headlines, but Newark has 3 pristine water sources here in New Jersey. And then Mayor Booker attempted to privatize this water. And interestingly enough, in the last couple of years, the person who headed that project, as well as her partners on that project, have all been indicted and are now going to serve prison sentences or hefty fines. And this was going on, this is a very neoliberal tactic, privatizing public resources, especially something as important as water. Now, of course, this was like 5 or 6 years before Flint and, before lead got back in vogue. But, there's been curious issues like that. Another example would be when Mayor Booker started off, when he got into council, he was able to pass a 5-year moratorium on demolition of affordable housing. But once he became mayor, he allowed the demolition of half of half of Hyatt Court. Hyatt Court is in the Ironbound, and I was part of making sure that we at least got to keep half of it open. We really were trying to keep all of it open. He raised back the Terrace, which was one of the largest complexes that we had left, also a historic complex here in Newark in the Central Ward. He did the same thing for Felix School, which was really in shape, and now they're just abandoned buildings that are standing up. And, as much as the PR is good, the public policy hasn't been so sound.
Right. And for people who live locally in Newark, and again, who do activism like you, first of all, what have been some of the greatest or largest challenges that you all have faced just as a community, right, and as a city? And then secondly, what are some of the challenges that you all have had at the community level? So we talked a bit about Booker and how his position and relationship was not so great with regard to his policy. But are there sometimes local mayoral or city council or other challenges that you all are dealing with that sort of serve as impediments to your activism and progress in the areas of environmental justice and housing rights?
So my partner, my wife, is from Los Angeles. She grew up in Commerce, and we are both very committed to our communities. We've done a lot of organizing in our communities, and when she moved here about 4 years ago, she was very surprised at how everything here kind of happens behind closed doors. If you might have a public meeting, you might even have a smaller public meeting with a few representatives and elected officials, but it's sometimes the deals, the real decisions are made afterwards among 3 or 4 people, oftentimes mostly men, no community input. This is happening at every level of government in Newark, and oftentimes that means sitting down with moneyed interests, whether that's developers, landlords, whether it's people who are trying to set up new businesses. That is a very long-time culture, a very ingrained culture in Newark about making these deals or kind of sitting down and seeing what can be done versus, advocating to avoid corruption at all costs or increasing pollution or any damages to people in the community. Some of the ways that I can illustrate that are here in Newark. A lot of people don't know that Newark is one of the largest environmental justice communities. It sits on the front line. There's a lot of industry that even though manufacturing left Newark, we still have the port. We still have tons of highways that allow the trucks that come in and out of the port. There are tons of Superfund sites, just areas that cannot be used because they're completely polluted and need to be remediated, like the Diamond Alkali site, where many folks don't know that Agent Orange was produced right in the Ironbound.
Wow.
But these places are now completely unusable, totally polluted. People have been fighting to fix these places up or to prevent the creation of more places. And that started, about 30 years ago with a group called Ironbound Communities Against Toxic Waste. And eventually the folks from Ironbound Communities Against Toxic Waste linked up with Ironbound Community Corporation, and they have been able to wedge themselves into representing the community at that table, even though sometimes there are those attempts, or we do participate in sitting down with folks and having these conversations after a public meeting. There are organizations that for a very long time have been trying to consolidate people power so they appear a way at that. And I think that our slate that we're running, we're called the Movement of the People. There's 4 of us that are running together. We're all part of Homes for All, which is a housing coalition that started up through work over the last 4 or 5 years. We're all come from that same lineage of activists who are trying to make sure that not that we have a seat at the table, but that we have a table, that we're the folks who are inviting people outside of the city to come and sit down if they're planning to provide good jobs and allow for a good environment for our families here.
And has there been local support for that beyond the activist community? Are there any representatives or, again, like local figures that have more or less pulled their weight and done what they were supposed to do to help you all? Or has that also been part of the sort of uphill battle that most activists face?
Well, what I've seen is that, unfortunately, over the last 4 years, all of the folks on the council, all 9 members of the city council, to one extent or the other, have supported the development in Newark and the landlords in Newark. Newark is made up of 78% renters. We don't have a champion. Even though 78% of us rent in Newark, we don't have a champion on the city council. We don't have a champion in the mayor. They are, they say that they're representing all interests, including the developers and the landlords, which, they're part of their constituents somehow. I don't think that's necessary for our slate, but I know that some of them are more related to labor than others. Some of them are more sensible to their wards because there are 5 that are specifically dedicated to their wards. So they might come out when there's a meeting on demolition of public housing or a meeting on creating transformers in their neighborhood, and then people come out and make an issue of it. But I can't say that there is an activist representing constituents on the council. I can't say that there's someone who every time is on the side of the poor, and I know that that's a priority for us.
Is there, and most of these are Democrats, right? If I'm not mistaken, like most of Newark votes Democrat, correct?
Yes. Well, so the Newark municipal election is nonpartisan because we are under something called the Faulkner Act. The Faulkner Act is a state bill that allows each municipality to choose how they're going to run their government, and ours, chose this version a long time ago. But it's nonpartisan, yet almost everyone is overwhelmingly Democrat, and there are machines here. There is a very strong machine. The county executive of Essex County, which is where Newark is, that county executive is very powerful. He's made a lot of changes in Newark, a lot of improvements throughout the county, but he also has this very well-oiled machine, and it's easy for him to turn out votes for the incumbents, which is why it's difficult to challenge this culture and these practices that for about 20 years now have constantly been working.
And they have, I'm assuming that they have ties with a lot of the sort of corporate interests that are coming into the city. But I'd also be curious if these people, are these long-term residents that are running the show politically? And are these sort of outside actors that come to Newark, live there for a couple years, and then end up sticking around for political gain?
Well, all the people on the council right now are Newarkers or long-time Newarkers. There's an interesting phenomena here in Newark where you have to be a Newarker. You have to have your bona fides if you really want to get any type of credibility from folks wherever you go. If you're not from Newark, or if you haven't been from Newark in the last 5 or 10 years, a lot of people will isolate you for that. So we don't see people moving in and out of the council or in and out of government, and I'd say that has been so since about '67, since about when after the uprising happened in the '70s. There were a lot more black elected officials who were voted in, and that kind of it stayed that way for a very long time. Now, what I'm seeing, however, and we're seeing this all over the country, is that our elected officials are middle of the road Democrats, very either centrist, if not center right, and they are often supporting very neoliberal policies. So in Newark, we have longtime corporate players like Prudential, who was very instrumental in rebuilding the city after 1967. But we also have groups like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, with who we made a very bad deal for jobs, and who we are still dealing with, trying to make sure people who work for Port Authority in New Jersey don't get paid as much for Port Authority in New York, and it's really on the poor advocacy that's done by our elected officials. Other groups are starting to come into Newark. I think that a lot of the developers and the not so much the landlords, but we do have new developers that are coming in, and they come in with tons of promises of it's easy for them to make the luxury apartments, and of course it benefits them because in the long run this is going to be how they're going to retire. But the folks who come and set up supposedly low-income apartments often skimp out on the services that they said that they were going to bring. For example, we have this one development called Teachers Village. It was supposed to have a vertical farm inside. That has been stripped off of it. It's supposed to have tons of retail at the bottom, retail at the floor level. A lot of that hasn't come to fruition. We will get a lot of promises and not a lot of results. Yet our elected officials, they instruct zoning and planning board officials, other folks to pass laws or first to allow variances so that these developers can come in and start developing, give them tax abatements so that they have incentive to develop, yet we don't make anything out of it, or we don't get anything out of it as the workers. And now even you see how the mayor is willing to bend over backwards, where somehow he and Chris Christie put together $7 billion, two of them coming from Newark. I have no idea where this money comes from, because they didn't fund the Civilian Complaint Review Board at $500,000 like they said. The police are already making $130 million, mostly of taxpayer dollars. I don't see where we're getting that. There's tons of mismanagement, and it comes from the influence of these outside corporations, of these people who are lobbying so that they can come in, set up shop, make some money, and not improve the lives of the workers.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, too, because you mentioned Chris Christie, who finally has left office, thank goodness. But now I've noticed that the incoming governor, if I'm not mistaken, he's a Democrat, but he has Wall Street ties and is also sort of right-leaning on certain economic issues. What are your thoughts, if any, on sort of the prospect of this new governor and what potential issues that may lie ahead that you'll have to deal with?
Well, it's absolutely impossible to do worse than Christie. So I'm very glad that we have a new governor. And I have to say that I am impressed with how the governor is able to show up in places where average people are. And I'll say that because the first day that the governor got into office, I got a text message from my pastor, and he says, Victor, the governor's coming to the church. I just got a call. They want to do a meeting here. And our church has a long history of being available to the public. They do town halls. They really are open to the community. So he was very excited that the governor showed up. And I get there, and Working Families New Jersey was there working with folks, and I saw that there is a valuable connection there. I know before he got elected, he immediately linked up with tons of activists here in Newark, and people who are really doing good stuff, really on the ground, in the trenches type of stuff, which to me was inspiring. I never saw Chris Christie doing something like that. So some of the best housing organizers that I know, people who, they went out to these local meetings of People's Organization for Progress, for example, or they really tried to get out there. I was very interested in the way that he set up his campaign. I was equally motivated, of course, by seeing a lot of the other folks in their candidates. I say this only because there was a gentleman, Seth Chaperdale, who ran on the Green Party ticket. And that's another person who I saw at every protest, at every grassroots meeting. A bit of an aside, but I mention it only because in this last election, we saw a lot of people trying to connect into their communities. Fortunately, so did our incoming governor, and he is pretty linked up. I think that in terms of economic opportunities, the legalization of marijuana, it looks like everyone in New Jersey is just hanging on, waiting to see what's about to happen. Because I've heard people talking about setting up dispensary cooperatives. I've heard of people setting up marijuana tourism to attract people from across the river in New York into New Jersey. I've heard of how they want to expand the current few dispensaries that are here in New Jersey. But people are saying things like, why don't we try to get legal representation for folks using that revenue to do like a civil Gideon, a guaranteed representation, kind of like what's happening in New York City right now with immigration or with housing. And a few other interesting proposals of what we can do with that money. I personally am working with a group called UCEL. This is less to do with the governor, but I really think that the future is going through shared economy, not in the sense of like Uber or Lyft, but definitely in terms of a solidarity economy, something based in building cooperatives or helping folks who have all these great skills, being able to manage them collectively and generate revenue as owners rather than just as workers in undemocratic settings. I have this sense that I know that I'm going to be trying to push that to the next, however long here in New Jersey, and it'd be interesting to see what the governor would think about helping with something like that.
Right, and that's definitely, it seems like that's something that would go back to a lot of Newark's roots, right? Because I know Newark has a fairly large immigrant population from Latin America. There are also lots of people who are from, who came up from the South, Black people who came up from the South after slavery who settled in Newark. So it's often been, it's long been a place where people have had to literally work outside of the state in large degree and come together and sort of create things on their own to get things and keep things running, right? And I'd say especially after, the industrial boom fell in Newark, we've seen a lot of problems, but we've definitely also seen a community that's been willing to come together and really, work towards changing things. I'd be curious to know too, because we haven't touched on education a lot, but one thing that comes up often in the news is charter schools in Newark. And I know, Zuckerberg had done a deal with Cory Booker back in the day, if I'm not mistaken, to donate X $1 million to public schools in New Jersey, and I think Newark specifically. But that money just sort of like seemed to dissipate, like didn't really go anywhere. And so I'd be curious to know your take on education and what on the ground, what the education advocacy looks like, if you have any background on that.
Absolutely. So recently, the big buzz around education is that the public schools are regaining local control. We lost local control of our schools in about 1993, and this is now Newark is regaining their control over their schools, and there's a lot of talk about what are the changes that are going to come, who's going to get hired, what are the hiring processes. The charters, of course, now have, you still hear the buzz, but I think the jury's still not out. Like a lot of people think that it's unfair that charter schools are not taking people who have special needs or who have an IEP. They think that it's unfair how sometimes the people are chosen to go into the charter schools. Also, some folks don't like the discrepancies in the quality of the school itself, or better said, the charter schools as private schools seem to be better. They're in places, they get different resources than the public schools. And so there's this optic of the public schools seem worse on face. I think there's like a resentment of this public funding going toward this private goal.
Right.
Even though it is for the public, but not everyone's getting it. And there's just these clear discrepancies. But also, I think a lot of people a couple of things are inspiring. I do see a community school that's coming up in downtown Newark. They're located on Halsey Street, which is really coming up. It's very local controls on Halsey Street. There's a lot of Black-owned business. There's a few cooperatives there, and they're kind of under the gun because they're right next to Prudential, which just built a new headquarters, and this area, the rents are rapidly rising and gentrifying. But folks are holding on, and they're really bringing in a lot more people and representing people there locally. There's a school in that area, and I think that's very encouraging. On the other hand, in terms of the public schools and the struggle that's happening in there is a faction of one of the teachers' unions, and they're called New Caucus, NEW Caucus. Mm-hmm. And the New Caucus advocates for, I would say, the most progressive forms of education. They're a much more radical faction of the union, and they're somewhat linked to another organization called New Jersey Communities United. And New Jersey Communities United is a grassroots coalition that has organized several young people, several students. And the students they did several sit-ins, takeovers. They sometimes just interrupted the school board meetings that were going on to advocate for local control, to advocate getting rid of bad testing, to advocate to have more student input on the curriculum and on their studies. It's very inspiring because this group is mostly made up of young people. Of course, they have some adults who are organizing or backing them up, but a few years ago, some of the members of that organization they were able to facilitate a massive walkout and a massive protest of high school students who were completely opposed to the state control and to the conditions of the public school. So now that we're regaining local control, there's a solid base of young people and recent grads who are very active, and they're working with the teachers in some of the unions. I'm very hopeful about that. I want to see a lot of results coming, or I'm excited to see the results coming from that organizer.
So when you said earlier that, and you just mentioned it as well about regaining control, but when the control of the schools was removed from the local area, what does that look like? I mean, was it like an outside manager that dealt with education, sort of like what we've seen in Detroit, or is there is it just like the state controls it? What does that mean when the local community loses control of the schools?
But it's the latter. It is state control outright. There were the Board of Education, even though they were still school board, the members of the school board have been elected continuously since the takeover by the state. But the school board wasn't able to make all the decisions, or what they would make recommendations, but they didn't have actual control over the curriculum or how things were going to happen. This was done by folks at the state instead. So there's someone named Cammie Anderson who, for a long time, had control over this. During that state period of control, recently the governor or the former governor, Chris Christie, implemented something called park testing, which a lot of the teachers found just had no value on giving another test, another standardized test to students, and there were all these very high standards, all these big risks that were really just making students nervous in terms of what if I don't meet certain achievement standards, and it wasn't contributing anything to the school, and that school board couldn't do anything about it. Recently, the school board has been very excited about the elections, and people have been excited to vote for school board elections because we know that we're gaining local control soon. In fact, I think it might be today or tomorrow that it's official that we do have that complete local control, that we don't have to be monitored in terms of the budget or in terms of curriculum or being able to make any of the decisions over our local public schools.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I hope that it works out, because I know that Newark's been through a lot and y'all need a break. You have to catch a break at some point. But definitely in the area of education, that's super important. On education, I was thinking, I interviewed a colleague of mine who's working on a book right now and who does a lot of research with regard to Puerto Rican youth and student activism, and sort of how people both on the island and in the diaspora were inspired by a lot of internationalist movements, left-leaning movements, to really rethink the way they saw education and education advocacy for students. And I'd be curious to know, just in the case of Newark specifically, if you're aware of any particular movements similar to that, or even movements that you've been involved in, and how they've connected some of these larger left-leaning movements or international movements. And I'd also be curious about your own background, if there's been anyone in your life and your family or mentors that have really inspired you, and in particular sort of what their political ideology has been and how it's connected you to places beyond just Newark.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have to say, in terms of myself, my parents are from El Salvador, and they were young. They were pretty young. They weren't even in their 20s. So I think my dad was 20 when he came over here. But in their teens, they got involved in the liberation struggle in El Salvador. El Salvador was run by military dictatorships for a very long time, dictatorships that were backed by the United States, and during the 12-year war, and even before that, the United States would send about $1 million a day to help the military, or give $1 million in military aid or direct funding to get guns for the military or bombers, and oftentimes they would really just kill populations indiscriminately. And my parents, they saw that in the cities. This was mostly going on in the rural areas, but what they saw in the city was people organizing, people getting involved in their communities, people spreading the word, and this all had to be done clandestinely. So this was really grassroots, very underground type of organizing, and both my parents were involved in different ways. My mom was more on the ground, and at one point she almost became a child soldier. My dad was involved more in the student movement, and he was also part of that liberation struggle with the actual party that was trying to do so. And he found out, because everybody used pseudonyms, that members of his family were involved as well.
Wow.
And so this, and they never, I was never inculcated. They never told me, believe this or act this way. Or maybe I shouldn't say that. They never told me to believe something like, just because, to believe it on faith, but to have principles, to have values, to respect people, to care for one another, and to see equality in each other, to be humble, to be thankful for things. I think that really influenced me in the long run to think and act the way that I do. Here in Newark, I think just my mentors, and since I've been a little boy, hearing about the freedom movement and civil rights struggle. When I got into high school, and I was talking to my mentors there. There were members of militant groups in the 70s, or of the Black Panther Party, or even organizations that just happened to be organizing then at that time. And they all inspired me to be a part of organizing in Newark, of revitalizing my community from the ground up. And there's a lot. The thing is, there's fertilizer in Newark. Like there's nutrition for someone who's looking for something like that in Newark, because you have the longtime People's Organization for Progress with Chairman Larry Ham. He's well connected to Newark, and they do tons of annual events like the Martin Luther King Jr. March, or the annual March for Reparations. There's any time that there is actually on Mondays they have a standing meeting on police brutality. There's this real respect for organizing and doing it in a long term, doing it consistently. And to me, that's just very inspiring. It makes me feel like you got to be a part of it, especially if it's the type of thing that you want to do. Recently, we've been able to put together this organization, Homes for All, which is an amalgamation of all kinds of tenants in Newark, public housing, subsidized, Section 8, market rate, and homeowners. And we're using that same solidarity model, the same idea that people have to be active to make a difference, to first to motivate us and to change stuff at a local level. But now that we're running, and now that we're talking to more people and going into their apartments and seeing their conditions, we're expanding our network at the same time. So as my partner likes to say, we're planting 2 trees with 1 seed. We are both running for our positions, but also figuring out who are the movers and the shakers throughout Newark, who are the people who are very concerned and want to get involved in their communities. And we're gonna, whatever happens, win, lose, or draw this election, in the next 4 years, we're gonna grow stronger, and we're gonna continue using the same model of social justice, of community-based politics, of commanding by obeying the people that we're serving.
It's really exciting what you all are, what you're doing and what your team is doing, and especially people like you in general, right? Like activists in Newark. Again, I've mentioned this multiple times, but I really think that, Newark is a place that's often slept on, and there's a lot of amazing activism going there and a lot of things happening that I think people could learn from and expand into their own communities. So I'm curious to hear what you foresee for Newark, where you see Newark going in the future, and how you think Newark as a city and as a much larger community can sort of reach those goals. How can Newark be a more fair and equitable and inclusive place for everyone who lives there?
Yeah, well, I think that Newark is at a crossroads. So if we are able to either get representatives on the council, or maybe the council and the administration get religion, if tenants are well represented, then I think Newark may look like a place where there will be a representation of the tenants where they're not displaced. Right now, if we don't have representation on the council, what will quickly happen is that the rents have already gone up. The rents are at about $1,400, which I know for New York City often doesn't sound like much, but here in Newark, we had people paying $700 or $800 not too long ago who are now facing $14,000, $15,000 in just a regular place, and these luxury apartments will go up to $2,000 or more. Mm-hmm. And so they're simply not available to our people, and the council, the planning board, the zoning board, they're stepping all over the master plan. They're saying that that's just a suggestion. It's not actual law, that we don't have to follow it, even though we spend a lot of time putting input in there. If we do get representation, I think that we will respect the master plan. I know that we will respect our riverfront and not put up 40-story buildings the way that the incumbents have just approved for developers in Newark. I know that the mayor right now has a plan to get 2,020 people jobs by 2020. And unfortunately, he hasn't enforced any of the laws that are on the book right now. I think that if we would get on the council, or if we are able to advocate and push the council to do the right thing, they would be implementing the policies, not only their own ordinances, but using the county, state, and federal money, federal monies that come in that are supposed to go to training, hiring, and licensing people. I think that we would actually be able to implement that instead of just letting it gain dust and not actually put it into place. I think that if Amazon comes to Newark within the next 4 years, we're going to see a complete shift in the demographic. We're going to see changes in the neighborhood characteristics, because these bigger buildings are going to come in with that are trying to create more density and have all this much more expensive housing for Newarkers. I think that that's going to impact the next election, because depending on how many gentrifiers come into Newark, we might start losing seats on the council for people who have been longtime Newarkers. And I don't think that the council thinks about that at all. I do think that Ras Baraka will has the best chance of being mayor as it is right now. So that's definitely going to be Newark for the next 4 years. But regardless of who has control, what I see amongst the grassroots and amongst the people is a higher level of organizing, a more sophisticated level of organizing. People are taking on very difficult issues and maneuvering them very easily, because they're linking up with professionals and with organizations that are interested in helping them out. So regardless of what happens at the government level, I know that on the ground, we're working hard to improve our city and really take the orders from the people and move forward the people's agenda, not those of money interests.
Right. And I think, too, that, I mean, you mentioned just a second ago that the ways that a lot of external development changes the way the city looks in terms of its demographics and its even geographic, spatial, different, spatial organization and the like. One thing, too, that I was just thinking as well is if you're having, one thing that I saw, for example, I used to live in Bed-Stuy and now I live in Baltimore. And one thing that I see in both of these places is that there is an intense influx of policing, for example, in areas that they're trying to switch or flip into being more upscale housing areas and neighborhoods. Yeah. And there's also, I mean, right now, when you're thinking about crackdowns of immigration, although that's been ongoing, not just in Trump's administration, but before that as well.
Right.
I'm just thinking about Newark being a space where there are a lot of Latino immigrants, and I'm wondering like what that would look like as well. So if you combine both policing and ICE enforcement and gentrification, that's a really dirty cocktail, and dangerous one at that. So
absolutely, and we need a stronger policies. I know the rave is sanctuary cities, but we need to address public safety so that both immigrants and potentially undocumented immigrants, and as well as the average young black person, young man or woman who is walking down the street and is being accosted by the police, we need public safety to stop. We need to stop broken windows policing, and we need to stop criminalizing the people who really feel impacts when they're being criminalized. A young person in a suburb might get a second chance through so many different programs that exist, while in Newark, an officer might give a young person a criminal charge, and that's it for their employment. That's it for their housing, and they might only be 20, 21 years old. The same thing happens with undocumented immigrants who might be flagged for deportation. We need to really codify, and we need to change the way that policing is happening in Newark, so that our residents, especially the folks who are involved in crime at all, stay safe.
Right. No, absolutely. I hope that too is something that the city itself can take on with greater. Greater dedication, because again, like I just think as someone who lived in New York, someone who now lives in Baltimore, and then I know Newark a little bit, I know that these issues are ongoing and definitely need to be countered in terms of the
Yeah.
public safety issue. So I know that you're on the road right now. Like literally, as we're having this interview, you were driving to
Yes.
do something related to your campaign. So I'd be curious to know if you could tell us a little bit about that. What are you driving to? What are you doing today? What are the next steps for your campaign? And then also, how can people find out more about what you do? Some advocacy that you're involved in, and also that for people in Newark, the actual campaign itself.
Sure. So we're AMP, A Movement of the People. If you look up amovementofthepeople.com, you'll see our website and some of our bios and our stories there. You can also find me on Instagram at Victor for Council. That's Victor for Council, FOR, Victor for Council on Instagram. There you'll see some pictures of what we're doing. So this morning I went down to the county welfare office in Newark to attempt to collect petitions from the folks there. It was an off Monday, so there weren't too many folks. We went to a public school and we picked up some signatures there. We had a 3-person team on the ground, and this is less than 12 hours after 3 of our teams wrapped up last night, hitting 2 different housing complexes and 1 neighborhood in downtown. And so I, to be honest, at this very moment, I'm driving to a training for work. But I have.
So you're still working while you're campaigning, in other words.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so I represent homeless young people at Covenant House, New Jersey, throughout courts in New Jersey. And in the mornings and in the evenings and at noon, what I've been doing is campaigning. So that'll look like this morning going to the schools, or at noon, I love hitting Broad Street and Market Street, which is our main intersection in downtown Newark, and we'll pick up a lot of signatures there. In the evening, I'll go to meetings, or I'll do door knocking. On the weekends, we do a lot of door knocking. We have a standing meeting on Sundays where people from the community come. What I like about the standing meetings is there are maybe a handful or more of people who are always there. And then there's people who come in and out and who I know from the community who want to see what's going on, who figure out how they could put in their 2 cents. And, our network keeps growing. It's been very encouraging to see how many of the organizers and organizations that we've been working with support us and come out for us and give us whatever resources that we need to, because we're really running on a shoestring budget. But we're all very dedicated. Most of us are employed. All of us are, average folks here in Newark, and it makes it easier to reach people that way. And not only that, but when we do talk to people, we realize that none of the elected officials are personally going out and shaking hands and learning or trying to address people's issues. I know that whether, again, win, lose, or draw, our network is growing, and we're also figuring out new issues in housing that we have to take on to improve the quality of life for people in Newark. I wish that the people who are in power could say that too, but they don't, and that's what makes us different. That's why we're a movement of the people. And for the folks listening, it's myself, Victor Monterrosa, running as councilman at large, Anthony Diaz running as councilman for the Central Ward, Helene Freeman, who is running for councilwoman of the North Ward, and Tanisha Gardner, who is running for East Ward councilwoman. All of us part of Homes for All, a grassroots coalition of housing organizations and activists that successfully pushed to strengthen the rent control ordinance, to get an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and now we're fighting to get onto the ballot and into electoral power here in the city.
Well, I am already super impressed. I hope that you all win. I wish you the best of luck. Even if you don't win, it's amazing just the work that you all do on the ground. And it's obviously so important. And I hope that you all are able to continue that both within and beyond the campaign space. So I don't doubt that you will.
Thanks, Wendy. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And thanks again so much, Victor, for joining me. And I hope you have, again, really good campaign. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
And thank you so much for listening to episode 8 of the Left Pocket Project podcast. As always, you can find the Left Pocket Project on Twitter at LeftPOC, on Facebook, and that's facebook.com/LeftPOC, on Reddit as LeftPOC, and on Media Revolt as, of course, LeftPOC. As for the podcast, you can subscribe to the podcast by checking out SoundCloud, and that's soundcloud.com/LeftPOC, Spreaker, and that's Spreaker.com/user/LeftPOC, and on iTunes by just going to the iTunes store and searching for Left POC under podcasts. And finally, if you'd like to show your financial support, you can go to patreon.com/LeftPOC. Thanks so much for listening, and have a good one.